Perfect. So good afternoon, everybody. I first want to just say thank you for having me. It was great to be invited and have the opportunity to talk about something that I'm quite excited about. Anytime I get the chance to talk about the next policy framework and these frameworks, I'm pretty excited to do that. And so for those who don't know me, thank you again for the introduction, but I'm Amy Standish. So I'm one of 3 assistant deputy ministers at the Ministry of Agriculture, and I am lucky enough to kind of focus in on that policy and programming space. So next slide. And so we have got some short time here together today, and I just wanted to go through a few things, and then again, happy to answer any questions there at the end. But I really want to just give that quick overview snapshot of what is sustainable CAP. Stephen presented on that a little bit, and we've been hearing about it throughout the day, but just a very quick highlight there. And then I want to get into the timelines around the next policy framework to give you a sense of what does the next 2.5 years really look like? When are those opportunities to engage and get a really good understanding? And of course, we'll dive into that detail on what the first engagement is and just that first milestone, and then wrap up with next steps and any questions. So next slide. So where are we today? Well, we're about 2.5 years into sustainable CAP. And you can see there, and Steve covered a lot of this, so I'll be pretty brief as I go through. But across the country, this is that $3.5 billion investment by federal and provincial governments in those strategic initiative areas. It is also the framework that enables business risk management programming. And so I'm very careful, and Steve did a good job of explaining it to say the business risk management programming is demand driven. So when I say 3.5 billion, that is purely strategic initiatives, and BRM is outside of that. So in Saskatchewan, what does that boil down to? Well, that's that $485 million investment over 5 years. And you can see there, again, cost shared 60-40, again, because shared jurisdiction between the federal government and the province when it comes to matters of agriculture. And all of this under sustainable CAP is really guided by what we call the Guelph Statement. And so you've heard a little bit this morning about what's coming in the Halifax Statement, but we're often looking to that Guelph Statement right now in terms of vision, the guiding principles, and the priorities that help enable and support some of the programming that we have. Next slide. And I recognize that it might be a little bit challenging to read this with all of our boxes. I tend to call this our postcard. But just a level deeper in Saskatchewan. So you can see there across the top, those are the 5 priority areas that you'll hear us refer to a lot under sustainable CAP. And really what that does is helps us kind of drill down to say, what types of programs do we want to offer in the province to support those policy priority areas? And again, we would have went through a bit of a process last go around, talking with a lot of groups, producers, and associations to say, what's working well, what's not, and what do we need to offer. So under each, you'll see that there's a number of programs. Some are very producer focused at the farm level. Some are focused on scaling up our value-added businesses. And then there's others that also support our industry associations. So I know there was shout outs today in some of the other presentations, programs like Farm and Ranch Water Infrastructure Program. There's been irrigation development and efficiency and a lot of work done there. And then a lot of research funding as well in that last pillar there on the end. So I won't go through in great detail, but just giving you that postcard snapshot. Next slide. Perfect. You're well timed with me back there. And so as I mentioned again, and I won't go into great detail here, but sustainable CAP is really what enables us to offer those business risk management programs. And so again, to be clear, not included in the 485 million, it is demand driven, so changes on a year-to-year basis. So you've got there at the top, there's agri-insurance, which crop insurance in Saskatchewan as kind of a well-known one that people are familiar with. Agri-invest, which we talked about a bit this morning, agri-stability, and then last, agri-recovery, which we tend not to call a program, but more of a framework. And so this is really how do we support producers and the industry recover after disaster. So it covers those extraordinary costs. And some of you in the room might recall back to the years of 2021 and 2023 when we had some pretty severe drought conditions in the province that we responded to. So I'll go to the next slide. And it's perfect. You can see the coordination between me and my federal colleague. We've got kind of the same image when we talk about the milestones here. And so again, I said halfway through, so we're kind of taking a look. We're already starting conversations about the next policy framework, and they've really been kicking off around those federal, provincial, territorial tables. And so 3 milestones you'll see there in the green. And so where are we today? Well, we're at that first one, this ministerial policy statement that is July of 2026, we hope. So that is when ministers across the country are going to get together in Halifax. They're going to be talking about this, bringing to that table what they've heard from industry across their jurisdictions, and hopefully signing on to something at that time. The second one you can see there, so this is called the Multilateral Framework Agreement. This gets a level deeper, just to give you a sense. So we talk about those very high-level priorities. This gets into, okay, well, what are we going to accomplish under those priorities? It also gets into a lot of the detail around business risk management. And so following that first milestone, the conversations around business risk management are going to increase as well as we gear up for signing on to that Multilateral Framework Agreement. And the third piece is the bilateral agreements. So this is where Canada would sign individual agreements with every province and territory, and that is what enables our very specific provincial programming. And so when you look at this timeline, again, we are at the front end. You can see there that we've got that bar right underneath that stakeholder engagement. And that's really to symbolize that starting essentially kind of in the last few weeks here, the conversation with industry, with producers, is going to continue for those next 2.5 years. And as we go along, it's going to get more detailed, a little bit more into the weeds. But right now, we're starting at that very high level to say, what are the policy priorities that we want for this next agreement? One of the things I'll mention, and I probably have it on another slide as well, but just that consideration of the next policy framework is going to run from 2028 to 2033. And so going into it with that mindset as well of what does 2033 have in store? I think even with the last agreement, we saw how quickly things could change, circumstances in the environment around us. And so thinking about how are we more flexible, more agile, and able to respond as things around us are changing. And so again, we're going to need to get feedback from all of you, which takes me to my next slide, which is the engagement phase 1. And so again, this is in lead up to that ministerial policy statement. And so what is the purpose of this first engagement? It's really to seek feedback on the current priorities. So how are those working? What's maybe not working? Are there things that you see missing? And I know that you heard earlier from Steve around those FPT tables, some of the things that are starting to come up that we're hearing. And I'll just repeat those in the room. So there's been a big focus right now on growth and competitiveness, which I don't think is a surprise, even hearing the conversations this morning. We've heard lots about science, research, and innovation and the importance of that to the industry. We've heard about resiliency, which again can mean different things, and so how you define that, but it's everything from some of those environmental pieces to how do we withstand some of the economic shocks out in the system. And then lastly is the markets and trade piece, which again, I don't think is a surprise, and we've seen that also in past frameworks. So again, key on this slide, I just point out again the 2033. So just that very future-minded and needing to consider that. And so as you've heard, there is lots of work happening across the country. So federally, they are out engaging. You're likely going to hear about other provinces and territories reaching out to engage. And so ultimately, that input helps at the official level, at the minister level, us to take that feedback back to our tables and bring that voice from our areas. So love to hear from people on what's on your minds and be able to bring that into the discussion about what we're hearing in Saskatchewan, what's important to the sector here. So next slide. And I love that my team has prepared me a QR code, but there's also a website there and an email address. And really, this is going to link you to a web page that we have. And over time, it is going to get updated as we go along. But really, the intent at this first phase is to ask for people to consider preparing a written submission to us. We set out a bit of a deadline end of April, acknowledging lots of people are starting to get busy into April. And I know it's a tough time there. But just to be the most impactful in the discussions that we're going to have around the FPT table. So again, you'll find on that website, there's high-level details, a lot in line with what I've shared here today. So a bit of why are we engaging, the timelines, some of those discussion questions to consider. So what are the key sector issues and some of that really big picture thinking to help us get the priorities right. And then, of course, guidance on how to submit that written feedback. So next slide, which is a little bit of the next steps in line with that. So again, opportunity to engage, prepare that written feedback. There was that email address there too. So if you ever have questions or you want to chat a little bit further, feel free to email and connect in with me or our team in the ministry. Once we gather all of that feedback, we are going to prepare just a bit of a what we heard summary, and we will be posting it on that webpage as well. So we will let people who submitted know that, yes, it's live, here's what we heard, so that everybody can get a bit of a sense of what are the patterns and what are the trends that the minister and other officials will be taking and considering as we go into those tables and discussions. Of course, then, hopefully July in Halifax, ministers will meet, like I said, and sign on to the new policy statement, which will set us forth to get a little bit more into the details, as I've mentioned, over those next 2 years to narrow in on the future of BRM, the future of some of our strategic initiative programming, and what we want to do here in this province to support the growth. So it's an exciting time. Just to kind of think about what's going on and what could be out in the sector. I have really enjoyed being here today to connect and hear some of the ideas and thinking that's already happening. And so, yes, we've broken this into milestones, but really appreciate the proactive thinking into some of the details. So the more you're thinking about it, the better prepared we will all be to have those conversations when the time comes. And so I appreciate time on the agenda. I will pause there and happy to take any questions.
It would be a pity if there wasn't at least one question. Jim Robbins, Sask Organics and the Organic Federation of Canada. Just a little feedback about the BRM programs that are currently in place. Compliments to the province on the organic program and in crop insurance. Our farm experienced 3 years of drought in the early 2000s, 3 years of drought in the early 2020s. Crop insurance was a huge help, and particularly the organic program in crop insurance. I have to say, I was in conversation with somebody over lunch that has had some help from AgriStability. Our farm has been a part of AgriStability from the beginning, prior to the name AgriStability. We've never collected a dime. It really hasn't functioned to stabilize us in any noticeable way. And just one final comment, if you would permit me. This isn't strictly related to the policy framework, but organics in the province has no viable means of supporting itself. There's no levy system in the legislation that works for us because we're multi-commodity. And I would just hope that the Saskatchewan government might be open to some discussion about creating a levy that would allow the organic industry to develop itself.
Appreciate the comments, and yes, happy to have conversation offline anytime, and the comments around AgriStability as well. And so that is, we're always talking about business risk management. I know I talk about next policy framework and the timelines, but that is a suite of programs that we are always talking about. How do we continuously improve and accept feedback on that? So if you have ideas as well, feel free to kind of tie in with us, and especially prepare for those conversations as we head into the multilateral framework agreement, because on those programs, it is also the negotiation around that FPT table to make changes there as well, because they are considered national. So appreciate the comments there.
Bill Probilski. The current suite of business risk management programs had a heavy emphasis on the environment and environmental sustainability and all those types of buzzwords. To quote a phrase from the late Bill Campbell, as producers, we we can't be in farming in the green if we're farming in the red. Do you anticipate the next policy framework having maybe less emphasis on environmental sustainability and more emphasis on economic sustainability for producers?
And I would say all things always right. The conversations tenfold depending on what we're hearing from industry at those tables. There's been a definite tone in the discussions to date around economic growth and competitiveness. And so we haven't had the same level of conversation diving into, say, the terms of sustainability and environment that we would have seen under sustainable cap at this same time. And so a lot of discussion about looking at the world around us and how important it is to make sure that our producers are profitable. I would say economic growth and competitiveness has been the top discussion point that I've seen at the tables so far. And a lot of what we're hearing from industry, not just here in Saskatchewan, but across the country. So it will be very interesting as the engagements go on to see if those things remain, but open to hearing feedback on that as well.
Thank you. Hello.
Aaron Stein, Alberta Federation of Agriculture, two-parter. First, given the last NPF, how can we ensure timely bilateral negotiations, like ensuring programming doesn't lag implementation timelines? That's a big one. And then the second, do you foresee much flexibility with provinces in regionalizing programming?
No, those are two great points. And so often, and Steve had kind of mentioned it, what we've heard so far is about that continuity and the stability from framework to framework. And so even last go around in Saskatchewan from cap to sustainable cap, a real push and effort, though it felt like it was down to the last hour to say, how do we get ready to launch programs in time? And so our teams internally to the ministry in Saskatchewan have been giving lots of thought to how do we try to back up even our internal timelines and try to get as far ahead as possible so that we aren't in crunch time or delaying the implementation of programs. But we hear you. The importance of that stability and continuity on some of our programs is very important at the producer level, just with the certainty so that they know what to expect and what's coming. So we hear that. And on the second piece, on the flexibility, I would say very important, right? When you look across the country and how diverse the ag sector is, we can't expect those strategic initiatives to look the same. Every sector and industry across the country is going to need different things to be successful and growing and competitive. And so, yes, there's some things or themes that you feel consistently across, but I would say that that is a discussion point as well, where we are tend to talk about the flexibility and really acknowledging the regional diversity across the country. So
do you think that the provinces like will Saskatchewan or Alberta be able to lead initiatives, or do we have to assume the trailing role in these as far as some of the pillars?
And by leading initiatives, and maybe I'll clarify, are you thinking about programming specific or?
Yeah.
And I would say even most of our programs are already, if you look at sustainable cap, like in Saskatchewan, it would be a provincial initiative that we've been having for a long time. But of course, it does involve that bilateral agreement and just making sure that they're eligible, that there's agreement about the outcomes of those programs. So I do think that flexibility is there.
Okay, thanks.
Just curious about, you identified the priority areas, one of them being the science and research, and then just trying to wrap my head around the cuts to AFC partway through the current framework. Yeah, just maybe if you could touch on that. And then also when you talk about resiliency and public trust, like if you could just kind of flesh out a little bit about what that actually looks like. Do you envision there being like a national food security strategy in there, or like what does that mean in practice?
So I'm trying to remember the first one, science, and then okay. And so on the science piece, I don't know that I'll have much more to offer than kind of what you've heard today. I would say it continues to be a priority for us in the province. And so, yes, there's been lots of active discussions, I think, in responding to the cuts at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. But in terms of science research and innovation and the programming that we offer in the province, I know our minister has been public and very committed to the funding that we provide in through some of those programs like ADF and different pieces there and supporting research chairs. So it continues to be on our radar and an active discussion, but hopeful to see it remain because it's a very important pillar. So, and then the second piece, and this is about resiliency and public trust. And so, yes, even there's elements of resiliency today in sustainable CAP. And so when you think about that, and I can get into even like those programming details, but even animal health and biosecurity. So how do we make sure that we are either mitigating risk or being as prepared as possible to respond to some of those risks that could hit? And so I think there is programming on one of my former slides that I could pull up and have another offline conversation. But as we head into the future and thinking about how do we want to define resiliency, and would really welcome feedback on what that means also to different industry groups, and making sure that we have some of that validation around the FPT table too of what that means. I'm seeing a thumbs up. It's time's up. Thank you everybody again for having me, and feel free to email me or come find me if any questions or want to chat about anything.